Marcus Johnson's cheek stung from Officer Caldwell's sudden slap, the sound echoing through the Washington, D.C. street as onlookers gasped. The 14-year-old boy's schoolbooks scattered across the sidewalk while the officer towered over him, shouting about loitering. "You picked the wrong kid to assault," Marcus whispered, pulling out his Supreme Court identification badge. "Justice Eleanor Richardson's intern since last month." The officer's face drained of color. But neither Marcus nor the stunned onlookers realized this confrontation would ignite a chain of events that would shake America's judicial system to its core. If you believe in standing up for justice and fighting against racial discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Tomorrow's episode will reveal how a single moment of injustice can trigger a nationwide revolution. What sacrifices will Marcus have to make in his pursuit of accountability? Let me know in the comments. Where you're watching from! Every morning at 5:30, Marcus Johnson woke up before his alarm in the small apartment he shared with his grandmother Eliza in southeast D.C. By 6, he'd already showered, dressed in his carefully pressed clothes, and reviewed his notes for the day. This morning was no different as the brilliant 14-year-old packed his backpack with textbooks and legal documents. His grandmother watched him with pride from their tiny kitchen, where the smell of grits and eggs filled the air. "Don't forget to eat, Marcus. That big brain needs fuel." Marcus had always been exceptional. When other children were learning to read, he was devouring chapter books. By 3rd grade, he was reading at a high school level and had developed an unusual fascination with constitutional law after a school field trip to the Supreme Court. His teachers noticed his remarkable abilities, especially Ms. Peterson, who encouraged him to apply for the Supreme Court's prestigious Young Minds Initiative, a competitive national program for gifted students that selected only 5 interns annually. When the acceptance letter arrived 3 months ago, his grandmother had cried with joy. The bus ride from southeast D.C. to the Supreme Court took nearly an hour. Marcus used this time to study, his fingers flipping through flashcards of legal precedents and constitutional amendments. Other passengers occasionally stared at the young black boy in his neat button-down shirt and tie, looking more like a miniature lawyer than a middle schooler. Marcus had grown used to these stares, just as he'd grown used to being the only black student in his advanced placement classes. At the Supreme Court, Marcus had been assigned to Justice Eleanor Richardson, only the 3rd black woman ever appointed to the highest court in the land. Justice Richardson saw something special in Marcus from their first meeting. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told him, "always questioning, never accepting the easy answer." Under her mentorship, Marcus researched historical precedents, organized case files, and occasionally sat in on preparations for upcoming arguments. His responsibilities exceeded those of typical interns twice his age, as Justice Richardson recognized his exceptional capacity for legal reasoning. Back at Jefferson Middle School, Marcus maintained a perfect GPA despite his demanding schedule. Nights often found him awake until midnight, completing assignments or reading ahead in textbooks. His teachers made accommodations for his Supreme Court commitments, allowing him to submit work early or online. His classmates alternated between awe and resentment of his achievements, leaving Marcus sometimes isolated, despite his success. Marcus had lived with his grandmother Eliza since age 7, when his parents died in a car accident on the Beltway during a rainstorm. Eliza, a retired nurse, had raised him with unwavering love and discipline. "Your parents would be so proud," she often told him, showing him the framed photo of his father graduating law school. "You're carrying on their legacy." His father had been the first in their family to attend college, becoming a public defender before his untimely death. Marcus kept his father's worn copy of A People's History of the Supreme Court on his bedside table. His dream was clear: to become a Supreme Court justice himself someday. Justice Richardson had laughed kindly when he confessed this ambition. "Why not? The bench could use more brilliant minds like yours." She hadn't dismissed him or treated his aspiration as childish, instead offering guidance on the long path ahead: undergraduate studies, law school, years of practice or teaching. Marcus absorbed every word, plotting his future with the same methodical precision he applied to his schoolwork. That morning, As Marcus organized files in Justice Richardson's chambers, he overheard her speaking with a clerk about an upcoming case, Wilson vs. Maryland State Police. The case involved racial profiling during traffic stops and could set a major precedent affecting police procedures nationwide. This could be the most significant civil rights ruling in a decade, Justice Richardson said, unaware that Marcus was listening from the adjacent room. The implications for addressing systemic discrimination in law enforcement are enormous. Marcus felt a surge of excitement. He knew this case could directly impact communities like his in Southeast DC, where many residents, including his older cousins, had stories about being stopped by police for no apparent reason. He made a mental note to research previous racial profiling cases during his free time, hoping to gain deeper insight before the arguments began next month. Little did he know that police conduct wouldn't remain an abstract legal concept for much longer. Within 24 hours, he would experience firsthand the very injustice the court was preparing to address. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the Supreme Court's marble columns as Marcus Johnson stepped out into the crisp autumn air. After 6 intense hours researching precedents for Justice Richardson, his mind buzzed with legal arguments and historical cases. Checking his watch, Marcus realized he had just enough time to stop at Pearson's convenience store to pick up his grandmother's heart medication before catching the bus home. The neighborhood surrounding the Supreme Court was among the most affluent in Washington, D.C., filled with historic townhomes and upscale shops. Marcus walked with purpose, his Supreme Court ID badge tucked into his pocket after clearing security. He entered Pearson's, nodding politely to Mr. Pearson behind the counter, who recognized the boy from his previous visits. 5 minutes later, prescription bag in hand, Marcus stood outside the store checking a text message from his friend Jamal about tomorrow's algebra test. Just 2 blocks away, officers Ryan Caldwell and Thomas Peters cruised slowly in their patrol car. Caldwell, a 15-year veteran with the D.C. Metropolitan Police, scanned the sidewalks with narrowed eyes. His personnel file contained 7 complaints for excessive force, 5 involving minorities, all dismissed after internal reviews. His partner, Officer Peters, was newer to the force, just 3 years in and still learning to navigate the unwritten rules of the department. "Look at that kid," Caldwell said suddenly, nodding toward Marcus. "Doesn't belong in this neighborhood." Without waiting for Peters' response, Caldwell pulled the patrol car to the curb. Peters glanced uneasily at the black teenager, who appeared to be simply checking his phone, dressed neatly in a button-down shirt and khakis. Marcus looked up as the officers approached, instinctively straightening his posture. His grandmother had given him the talk years ago about interactions with police. Be respectful, make no sudden movements, keep your hands visible, say "yes, sir" and "no, sir." "What are you doing hanging around here?" Officer Caldwell demanded, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. "Just checking a text message, sir," Marcus replied calmly, though his heart had begun racing. "I'm on my way to the bus stop." "ID," Caldwell barked, stepping closer. "This isn't a place for loitering." "I'm not loitering, sir. I was just at the pharmacy for my grandmother's medication." Marcus reached slowly for his wallet to show his student ID. "Don't reach for anything," Caldwell suddenly shouted, causing several passers-by to turn and stare. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus froze, hands raised, the pharmacy bag dangling from his fingers. "Sir, I was just—" The slap came without warning. Officer Caldwell's open palm connected with Marcus's cheek with a crack that echoed down the street. The force knocked Marcus back against the store window, his schoolbooks tumbling. From his backpack onto the sidewalk, a woman across the street gasped. Someone nearby started recording with their phone. "When an officer gives you an order, you comply immediately," Caldwell growled, looming over the stunned boy. "You understand me?" Marcus touched his burning cheek, eyes watering from the pain and humiliation. Officer Peters stood to the side, visibly uncomfortable but saying nothing. Marcus could feel rage building inside him, but his grandmother's warnings echoed in his mind. Instead of responding with anger, he reached slowly into his inner pocket. "You picked the wrong kid to assault," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. He pulled out his Supreme Court identification badge, the official seal gleaming under the streetlights. I'm an intern for Justice Eleanor Richardson. Have been for the past month. The officer's face drained of color as he read the badge. His partner, Officer Peters, stepped back in shock. Onlookers who had gathered to witness the confrontation murmured in disbelief. Marcus maintained eye contact with Officer Caldwell, refusing to be intimidated, despite the throbbing pain in his cheek. "You can call Justice Richardson to verify," Marcus continued, pulling out his phone. "I'm sure she'd be very interested to hear how DC's finest treat minors on public sidewalks." Officer Caldwell's demeanor changed instantly. "There's been a misunderstanding," he stammered, trying to regain composure. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. I was just doing my job." "By assaulting a 14-year-old without provocation?" Marcus asked, his voice gaining strength. "Is that in your training manual?" More phones were recording now. Officer Peters tugged at his partner's arm. "We should go, Ryan," he muttered. But it was too late. Marcus was already dialing Justice Richardson's number, his hands still shaking. But his resolve firm. What happens when a single act of injustice is captured for the world to see? Comment number 1 if you believe Officer Caldwell should be immediately suspended. Or number 2 if you think the entire system needs reform. Like this video if you've ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling, and subscribe to follow Marcus's fight for justice. Will Justice Richardson's influence be enough to protect Marcus from a system designed to shield officers like Caldwell? Or has he just made a powerful enemy who won't rest until he's silenced? Justice Eleanor Richardson arrived at the scene within 15 minutes, her government vehicle pulling up with a quiet urgency that parted the growing crowd. At 58, she carried herself with the dignified authority earned through decades of legal battles and historical decisions. When she saw Marcus sitting on a bench, ice pack held to his face, her typically measured expression gave way to barely contained fury. "Marcus, are you all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him despite her formal attire. When he nodded, she turned to face Officers Caldwell and Peters, who stood awkwardly beside their patrol car, surrounded by smartphone cameras and whispered commentary. "Which one of you put your hands on my intern?" Her voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Officer Caldwell stepped forward reluctantly, his earlier bravado deflated under the gaze of a Supreme Court justice. "Ma'am, there was a misunderstanding about—" "That's Justice Richardson," she corrected him sharply. "And there's no misunderstanding possible when an armed officer strikes an unarmed child. I want your badge numbers, your commanding officer's contact information, and I want it now." A paramedic had arrived to examine Marcus more thoroughly. His cheek showed significant redness and swelling, but no signs of more serious injury. The paramedic documented the injury with photographs for potential medical records. Throughout the examination, Marcus remained composed, answering questions clearly despite the shock still evident in his eyes. Word spread quickly. By the time Police Captain James Hargrove arrived, 3 local news vans had set up across the street. Captain Hargrove, a 25-year veteran sensitive to public relations disasters, immediately pulled Officers Caldwell and Peters aside for a hushed but intense conversation. Justice Richardson watched them closely, refusing to let Marcus out of her sight. "I'm going to ensure a proper investigation," Justice Richardson assured Marcus. "This will not be swept under the rug." "What about the Wilson case?" Marcus asked quietly, surprising her. "Won't this create a conflict of interest if you're involved with my situation while ruling on racial profiling?" Justice Richardson smiled sadly at his insight. "Let me worry about those complexities. Right now, my concern is your well-being. We'll navigate the legal waters later." Marcus nodded, but the wheels in his mind were already turning. The irony wasn't lost on him, becoming personally entangled in the very issue he'd been researching hours earlier. Beneath his calm exterior, emotions churned. Humiliation at being struck in public, anger at the injustice, and a growing determination that something meaningful must result from this incident. Captain Hargrove approached them, his expression professionally neutral. "Justice Richardson, I want to personally assure you that we're taking this matter extremely seriously. Officer Caldwell has been temporarily reassigned pending investigation." "Reassigned isn't good enough, Captain," She replied, "A child was assaulted by one of your officers. I expect suspension at minimum." Before Hargrove could respond, a commotion at the edge of the crowd announced the arrival of Eliza Johnson. Marcus's grandmother pushed through, her small frame propelled by maternal fury. Despite her 67 years and arthritic knees, she moved with determined speed. "Marcus," she called, rushing to embrace her grandson. When she pulled back to examine his face, her expression hardened at the sight of his swollen cheek. She turned toward the officers, years of restrained anger at a system that had consistently failed her community suddenly finding a focus. "Which one?" she demanded, her voice trembling. When Marcus indicated Caldwell, Eliza marched directly to him, stopping just short of the much taller officer. "You put your hands on my boy? On a child?" Officer Caldwell looked away, unable to meet her. "Please." "Ma'am, I was responding to 'don't you ma'am me,'" Eliza cut him off. "I've been watching men like you abuse your power my entire life. My father saw it, my husband saw it, and now my grandson experiences it firsthand. You should be ashamed to wear that badge." Captain Hargrove attempted to defuse the situation. "Mrs. Johnson, I understand you're upset. I promise you we'll conduct a thorough, Eliza scoffed. "Like the thorough investigations that cleared this officer after 7 previous complaints. My son-in-law was a public defender before he died. I know exactly how these thorough investigations work." While this confrontation unfolded, Marcus noticed something that made his stomach sink. One of the onlookers, a young woman who had been recording since the beginning, was now showing her phone to a reporter. The video was being transferred. Within hours, perhaps even minutes, the entire incident would be visible to the world. By nightfall, Marcus's prediction had come true. The video had gone viral, accumulating hundreds of thousands of views and sparking heated debates across social media platforms. Hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Supreme Court Intern" were trending nationally. The DC Metropolitan Police Department issued a carefully worded statement about investigating the incident and taking appropriate measures. Back home in their apartment, Marcus sat at the kitchen table while his grandmother applied arnica gel to his cheek. The phone had been ringing, constantly with calls from reporters, which they had decided to ignore for now. Justice Richardson had called twice with updates and to check on Marcus's condition. "Does it still hurt?" Eliza asked softly, her earlier anger replaced by tender concern. "Not as much," Marcus replied, though the emotional pain far outweighed the physical. "Grandma, I keep thinking about all the kids who don't have a Justice Richardson to call, who don't have the Supreme Court ID to protect them." Eliza nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "That's why what happens next is so important, baby. This isn't just about you now." Marcus stared out the window at the lights of their Southeast DC neighborhood. "I know," he said quietly. "That's what scares me." By morning, the video of Marcus's encounter with Officer Caldwell had amassed over 3 million views. All major news networks featured the story prominently, with headlines ranging from "Supreme Court Intern Assaulted by Police" to "14-year-old Black Prodigy Slapped by Officer." Marcus's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as classmates, friends, and even strangers attempted to reach him through social media. "Turn that off," Eliza advised, setting a plate of breakfast in front of her grandson. "You need to eat something before we face this day." Marcus nodded, powering down his phone. The surreal nature of his sudden notoriety hadn't fully registered yet. Just yesterday, he'd been anonymous outside his school and the court. Today, his face was on every news channel, his name in millions of conversations. The public reaction split predictably along political and racial lines. Many expressed outrage at the officer's behavior, pointing out the unconscionable nature of striking a child regardless of context. Others rushed to defend law enforcement, suggesting the edited video didn't show the full story or speculating that Marcus must have done something to provoke the officer. Hashtags warred for dominance. Stand with Marcus competed with Back the Blue. Justice Richardson called early, her voice conveying both support and caution. "The Chief Justice and I have discussed your situation, Marcus. We both feel it would be best if you took some time away from your internship until this dies down. You're asking me to leave? Marcus couldn't hide the disappointment in his voice. Temporarily, she clarified. This is for your protection, not punishment. The court must maintain its impartiality, especially with the Wilson case approaching. And frankly, the media circus will make it impossible for you to work effectively. Marcus understood the logic, but couldn't help feeling abandoned. After the call, he reluctantly agreed with his grandmother that he should return to school. Hiding won't solve anything, Eliza reasoned, and your education comes first, always. Jefferson Middle School wasn't prepared for the chaos that ensued. Reporters camped outside despite administration warnings. Inside, Marcus faced a barrage of questions and comments from classmates, ranging from supportive to insensitive. His history teacher, Mr. Dominguez, pulled him aside between classes. If you need to talk or if it gets to be too much, my door is always open, he offered. Marcus thanked him, appreciating the rare adult who didn't treat him as either a victim, to be pitied, or a celebrity to be examined. While Marcus navigated his sudden notoriety, forces were mobilizing behind the scenes. Officer Caldwell wasn't without allies. The powerful police union president, Victor Mercer, called an emergency meeting with Police Commissioner Frank Harrison. Mercer had built his career defending officers against allegations of misconduct, and he viewed Marcus's case as particularly threatening given the media attention. This needs to be contained, Mercer insisted in Harrison's office. The kid has too much credibility with that Supreme Court connection. Commissioner Harrison nodded thoughtfully. A political appointee with ambitions beyond law enforcement, he understood the delicate balance required. Publicly, we need to promise a thorough investigation. Privately, we need to control the narrative. What neither man realized was how quickly that narrative was slipping from their control. By afternoon, digital forensics experts online had enhanced the video, capturing clear audio of Caldwell's comments before the slap, including a muttered racial slur that hadn't been noticeable in the original upload. The enhanced video sparked a new wave of outrage. Civil rights organizations issued statements demanding Caldwell's immediate termination. The mayor's office, sensing the political liability, publicly promised a thorough and transparent investigation. Commissioner Harrison held a press conference, standing before a phalanx of microphones to assure the public that the department took allegations of misconduct seriously. Officer Caldwell has been placed on administrative leave pending a complete investigation, Harrison announced. The Metropolitan Police Department does not condone excessive force against any citizen, particularly a minor. What Harrison didn't mention was that administrative leave meant Caldwell continued receiving full pay while staying home. Nor did he acknowledge the department's history of clearing officers after similar incidents. By evening, Marcus had made a decision that would dramatically escalate the situation. After consulting with his grandmother and Justice Richardson, he agreed to give a brief statement to address the swirling speculation. On the steps of his apartment building, facing a forest of microphones and cameras, Marcus stood with remarkable poise for a 14-year-old thrust into the national spotlight. "My name is Marcus Johnson," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Yesterday I was physically assaulted by a police officer while checking a text message on a public sidewalk. I had committed no crime. I posed no threat. The only apparent reason for this treatment was the color of my skin." The crowd fell silent as he continued, his words measured but powerful. "I'm fortunate to have Justice Richardson's support and the protection that comes with my Supreme Court internship. But I keep asking myself, what about all the other kids who look like me who don't have such protection? What happens to them when the cameras aren't rolling?" Marcus paused, making eye contact with several reporters before delivering his most powerful line. "If this can happen to me with the protection of the Supreme Court, what happens to those without such privilege?" The impact was immediate. Within hours, his statement became the most watched news clip in the country, his rhetorical question quoted across platforms and publications. Marcus Johnson was no longer just a victim in a viral video. He had become the articulate, composed face of a movement. Are you outraged by how quickly people tried to discredit Marcus instead of addressing the officer's behavior? Comment number 1 if you believe there's a pattern of blaming victims of police misconduct. Or number 2 if you think each case should be examined individually. Like this video if you support Marcus's courage in speaking out, and subscribe to see how a 14-year-old prodigy takes on a system designed to protect those who abuse their power. Will Marcus's connection to the Supreme Court save him from what's coming next? Or will powerful forces ensure his voice is silenced before he can expose the truth? The morning after Marcus's statement, the pushback began with military precision. The Fraternal Order of Police issued a press release questioning the rush to judgment and reminding the public that edited videos rarely tell the complete story. Carefully selected police experts appeared on conservative news programs to explain proper procedure during suspicious person stops, subtly framing Marcus as potentially threatening despite his age. Within police circles, Officer Caldwell was being portrayed as a sacrificial lamb, a dedicated officer whose career was being destroyed for doing his job. Fellow officers started a fundraising campaign for his legal defense, raising over $50,000 in the first day. The campaign description painted Caldwell as a family man with an impeccable 20-year service record, conveniently omitting the multiple complaints in his file. Marcus first noticed the shift in narrative when he checked social media during lunch period. Someone had uncovered a 2-year-old post from his private account where he had criticized police following the shooting of an unarmed black teenager in Minneapolis. The post, written when Marcus was 12, was being circulated as evidence of his anti-police bias and agenda. "They're trying to make it seem like I deserved to be hit," Marcus told his friend Jamal, staring at his phone in disbelief. "Of course they are," Jamal replied with the weary knowledge of someone who had seen this pattern before. "They can't defend hitting a kid, so they have to make you look bad instead." The digital excavation didn't stop there. By afternoon, details from Marcus's school record had been mysteriously leaked online, highlighting a single disciplinary incident from 6th grade, when he had argued with a teacher over a historical inaccuracy in a textbook. The minor infraction was reframed as evidence of defiance toward authority figures. Justice Richardson called Marcus that evening, her voice heavy with concern. "Marcus, I need you to know that I'm facing pressure from some of my colleagues to distance myself from your situation." "Because of the Wilson case?" Marcus asked, already understanding the politics at play. "Partly," she admitted. "Justice Montgomery specifically suggested that my involvement with you constitutes a conflict of interest. He's pushing for me to recuse myself from Wilson." Justice William Montgomery was the court's most conservative member, appointed by a president who had campaigned on law and order rhetoric. His son was a police captain in Virginia, creating his own potential conflict that somehow never faced the same scrutiny. "Will you recuse yourself?" Marcus asked, dreading the answer. "Not without a fight," Richardson assured him. "But you should. Be prepared for the possibility that I may need to publicly step back, even if I continue supporting you privately." After the call, Marcus checked his email to find dozens of messages from strangers. Most expressed support, but several contained explicit threats. One detailed sender knew his grandmother's work schedule and threatened to teach him respect while she was gone. Marcus deleted the messages without telling Eliza, not wanting to worry her further. The next morning revealed a new level of intimidation. Marcus and his grandmother woke to find their apartment door and hallway vandalized with racist graffiti. The crude messages and symbols left no doubt about the targeted nature of the attack. Eliza called the police despite Marcus's reluctance, but the responding officers seemed uninterested, suggesting it was probably just neighborhood kids despite the apartment building's secure entry system. Word of the vandalism spread quickly through their community. By afternoon, neighbors had not only cleaned up the graffiti, but organized a rotation to keep watch over the Johnson apartment. Local business owners, church members, and community activists rallied around the family, providing security cameras, offering rides to school and work, and ensuring neither Marcus nor Eliza felt isolated. Pastor Michael Washington from Eliza's church became an unofficial spokesperson for this community support. "Marcus Johnson is our son too," he told reporters gathered outside the apartment building. "When they attack him, they attack all of us. We will not be intimidated into silence. The community's protective embrace provided some comfort, but couldn't shield Marcus from the growing media storm. Officer Caldwell had given an exclusive interview to National News Network, appearing in his living room with his wife and children, presenting the image of a dedicated family man whose life was being destroyed by political correctness gone mad. I was responding to suspicious behavior in a high-security area near federal buildings, Caldwell claimed, his voice steady and reasonable. The subject refused to comply with lawful commands and made a sudden movement toward his pocket. In that split second, I had to make a decision to protect myself and the public. The interviewer, known for her sympathetic approach to law enforcement, nodded understandingly. So you felt threatened by Marcus Johnson? I didn't know who he was at that moment, Caldwell replied. I just saw a young man exhibiting suspicious behavior, who then reached quickly for his pocket after being instructed not to. In today's environment, officers can't take chances. My priority was maintaining public safety. The interview aired in prime time, reaching millions of viewers. By morning, the hashtag #GetYouStandWithCaldwell was trending. The police commissioner's office released a statement that same evening, announcing that Officer Caldwell would remain on administrative leave with pay while the investigation continued, but stopped short of the suspension Justice Richardson had demanded. For Marcus, watching the systematic attempt to justify his assault was almost as painful as the incident itself. They're making it seem like I'm the criminal, he told his grandmother that night. Like I deserved what happened. Eliza sat beside him on their worn couch, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. This is how the system protects itself, baby. They can't admit they were wrong because that would mean admitting all the other times they were wrong too. Marcus nodded, understanding flowing between them unspoken. The stakes extended far beyond his individual experience. His case had become a battleground in a much larger war over accountability, race, and power. For the first time, he began to worry about his future. If they could twist a straightforward assault into a controversial debate, what else might they do to protect Officer Caldwell and the system he represented? The answer came the next morning when Marcus discovered his dream of a legal career might already be in jeopardy. His school counselor called him into her office, closing the door before speaking in hushed tones. Marcus, I received a call from the coordinator of the Jefferson Scholars Program, she said, referring to the prestigious high school preparatory program Marcus had been counting on for next year. They're reconsidering your admission in light of recent events. What? Marcus felt his carefully constructed future begin to crumble. They can't do that. My grades are perfect. It's not about your grades, the counselor replied sadly. They used the term controversy several times. I'm fighting for you, but you should be prepared for the possibility. As Marcus left her office, the magnitude of what he was facing began to sink in. The system's retaliation wouldn't be limited to discrediting him in the media. They were coming after his future, attempting to close doors before he could even reach them. The message was clear. Challenging power had consequences, and those consequences could follow him for life. 1 week after the incident, Marcus and his grandmother sat in the sleek downtown office of attorney Zoe Washington. Unlike the court-appointed defenders Eliza had encountered in the past, Washington's office spoke of success and influence. Modern art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Capitol dome, degrees from Harvard and Yale framed prominently. The good news, Washington said, reviewing the notes on her tablet, is that we have multiple witnesses and clear video evidence of the assault. The bad news is that we're fighting not just Officer Caldwell, but an entire system designed to protect him. A former prosecutor turned civil rights attorney, Washington had built her reputation taking on police misconduct cases. At 42, she had the polished appearance of someone comfortable in corridors of power, but her eyes held the intensity of someone who remembered why she fought. She had taken Marcus's case pro bono after seeing his statement on the news. We have two paths forward, she explained. Criminal charges against Officer Caldwell, which would require the district attorney's office to prosecute, or a civil lawsuit against both Caldwell and the department for violation of your civil rights. Why not both? Marcus asked, thinking logically. Washington smiled approvingly. Ideally, yes, but realistically, criminal charges against officers rarely succeed, even with clear evidence. DA Michael Reynolds is facing re-election next year and needs police union support. So civil lawsuit, Eliza concluded. That's my recommendation, Washington agreed. We sue for damages, but more importantly, we can demand policy changes as part of any settlement. This case could potentially affect how the entire department trains and disciplines officers. The meeting continued for another hour, with Washington meticulously documenting every detail of the incident and its aftermath. As they prepared to leave, Marcus asked the question that had been weighing on him. What about Justice Richardson? Will her support hurt or help us? Washington considered carefully before answering. Her private support is invaluable. Her public involvement is complicated. She's already facing significant pressure to recuse herself from the Wilson case due to her connection with you. That evening, Justice Richardson visited their apartment, arriving discreetly in an unmarked car. Over Eliza's homemade peach cobbler, she offered advice based on decades navigating legal and political minefields. Zoe Washington is an excellent choice, she approved. Listen to her guidance. Unfortunately, I'll need to step back publicly, at least until the Wilson case is decided. I understand, Marcus said, though the disappointment was evident in his voice. This doesn't mean I'm abandoning you, Richardson assured him. I'll continue advising behind the scenes. And Marcus, she added, her voice taking on a grave tone, be prepared for them to offer a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. They'll want to silence you. 3 days later, Washington called to confirm Justice Richardson's prediction. The police department's lawyers had reached out with an initial settlement offer, $100,000, in exchange for dropping all claims and signing an NDA that would prevent Marcus from discussing the incident publicly. It's insulting, Washington said, but it tells us they're worried. We're not taking it, Marcus replied immediately. This isn't about money. I'll tell them we're declining, Washington agreed. But be prepared for this to get uglier before it gets better. They don't like being refused. The settlement rejection made headlines, positioned by some media outlets as evidence that Marcus was cashing in on his 15 minutes of fame rather than seeking genuine resolution. Conservative commentators questioned why he would reject a generous offer unless he had ulterior motives. Meanwhile, Washington's legal team began the discovery process, requesting Officer Caldwell's complete service record. What they uncovered was more damning than expected. Beyond the 7 known complaints, there were 5 additional incidents that had never become public, 3 involving excessive force against minorities and 2 sexual harassment claims from female subordinates. All had been resolved through internal processes with no disciplinary action. More disturbing was evidence that complaints against Caldwell had been systematically buried. In 2 cases, dash camera footage had mysteriously malfunctioned. In another, witness statements contradicting Caldwell's account had been omitted from final reports. The pattern suggested not just individual misconduct, but departmental complicity in covering it up. While the legal case progressed, Marcus struggled with the emotional aftermath of the incident. Nightmares disrupted his sleep, often featuring Officer Caldwell's face contorted in anger. During waking hours, he found himself flinching at sudden movements, especially from authority figures. School became a daily ordeal as his focus wavered, his normally photographic memory now clouded by anxiety. For the first time in his academic career, Marcus received a B on a mathematics test. His teacher, Ms. Rivera, kept him after class, concern evident in her expression. "This isn't like you, Marcus," she said gently. "Is there something I can do to help?" Marcus stared at the unfamiliar grade, feeling as though he were failing not just the test, but everything his parents and grandmother had sacrificed for. "I can't concentrate," he admitted. "I keep thinking about the case, about what they're saying about me online, about whether any of this will make a difference." Ms. Rivera placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "What you're experiencing is normal after trauma. Have you considered talking to the school counselor or a therapist?" Marcus nodded non-committally, though the suggestion reinforced his feeling that something fundamental had broken inside him. The straight-A student with Supreme Court ambitions now struggled to complete basic assignments. The weight of being both a victim and a symbol had become almost unbearable. The pressure intensified when District Attorney Michael Reynolds called a press conference to address the case. Standing before a forest of microphones, Reynolds projected practiced solemnity as he delivered the news Marcus and his legal team had feared but expected. "After a thorough review of all available evidence," Reynolds announced, "my office has determined there is insufficient evidence of criminal intent to pursue charges against Officer Ryan Caldwell. While the interaction with Mr. Johnson was unfortunate, it does not rise to the level of criminal assault under district statutes." The carefully worded statement made no mention of the enhanced audio capturing Caldwell's racial slur, nor did it address the officer's history of similar complaints. Reynolds declined to take questions, walking briskly from the podium as reporters shouted after him. The announcement sparked immediate protests. By nightfall, several hundred demonstrators had gathered outside police headquarters, carrying signs, reading "Justice for Marcus" and "Black Children Matter." The protests remained peaceful, but grew each night, spreading to multiple locations throughout the city, including the courthouse and city hall. For Marcus, the DA's decision confirmed his growing suspicion that the system was designed not for justice, but for self-preservation. "They're all protecting each other," he told Washington during their next meeting. "The DA protects the police protect Caldwell, and they all protect the status quo." Washington nodded, unsurprised but sympathetic to his disillusionment. "Welcome to the real legal system, Marcus. Not the one in textbooks or Supreme Court arguments, but the one that operates in the shadows of power and privilege." "So what now?" Marcus asked, the weariness in his voice belying his 14 years. "Now," Washington replied with steely determination, "we push harder on the civil case. Reynolds may have declined criminal charges, but civil court has a lower burden of proof, and sometimes hitting departments in their budgets accomplishes what moral arguments cannot. Is our justice system fundamentally broken when cases like Marcus's are so easily dismissed?" Comment number 1. If you believe the entire system needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, or number 2, if you think reform within the current structure is possible. Like this video if you're standing with Marcus against a system that protects its own at the expense of justice, and subscribe to follow this journey all the way to its shocking conclusion. Will Marcus find a way to hold Officer Caldwell accountable when every institution seems aligned against him? Or will his pursuit of justice cost him everything he's worked for? 3 weeks after the district attorney's decision, Marcus returned to his internship at the Supreme Court. Justice Richardson had quietly arranged his reinstatement, arguing that denying Marcus his position would constitute punitive action against a victim. The Chief Justice, reluctant to create additional controversy, approved with the stipulation that Marcus maintain a low profile and work exclusively on cases unrelated to police conduct. The marble halls that had once filled Marcus with awe now felt different, both a sanctuary from the outside scrutiny and a reminder of the gap between legal ideals and reality. He moved through the building with heightened awareness, noting how some staff members avoided eye contact, while others offered subtle nods of solidarity. "Focus on the work," Justice Richardson advised during their first meeting back. "That's what I've always done during difficult times. The law may be imperfect, but it's the tool we have." Marcus threw himself into research for an upcoming case on environmental regulations, grateful for the intellectual challenge that temporarily displaced his personal troubles. While organizing files in the court's vast document room, he came across a folder mistakenly placed among his materials. It contained correspondence regarding a judicial conference from the previous year, including a photo that caught his attention. Police Commissioner Frank Harrison, standing arm in arm with conservative Justice William Montgomery at a private reception. The image might have seemed unremarkable, just two public figures at the same event except for a notation on the back, referencing continued appreciation for assistance in the Andrew Montgomery matter. The name triggered Marcus's memory. Andrew Montgomery was Justice Montgomery's son, and Marcus vaguely recalled a news story from several years earlier about a young man with that name involved in a drunk driving incident that had mysteriously disappeared from court records. Intrigued, Marcus discreetly searched court databases during his lunch break. The case existed in the initial filing system, but had been sealed by judicial order. More curious still, the arresting officer had been from Commissioner Harrison's former precinct when Harrison was a captain. Too cautious to keep physical evidence, Marcus took mental notes of file numbers and dates. That afternoon, he confided in fellow intern Sophia Chen, a Harvard sophomore who had often expressed progressive views on criminal justice reform. "I think I found something connecting Justice Montgomery to Commissioner Harrison," Marcus whispered, as they catalogued opinions together. "Something about Montgomery's son and a covered-up incident." Sophia's eyes widened with interest. "That could explain Montgomery's pressure on Justice Richardson to distance herself from you. What are you going to do with this information?" "I'm not sure yet," Marcus admitted. "I need to find out more first." The next morning, Marcus was summoned to Justice Montgomery's chambers, an unprecedented request that sent alarm bells ringing. The justice's secretary avoided eye contact as she led Marcus into the imposing office where Montgomery waited, seated behind a massive oak desk. "Mr. Johnson," Montgomery began without preamble, his thin lips barely moving beneath his meticulously trimmed white beard. "It has come to my attention that you've been accessing sealed court records and spreading rumors about my family." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but maintained his composure. "I was organizing files for Justice Richardson and came across some anomalies, sir. I didn't access any sealed records." Montgomery's cold blue eyes narrowed. "Let me be clear, young man. Your presence here has already created sufficient disruption to the court's dignity. I strongly suggest you focus exclusively on your assigned tasks if you wish to maintain this internship." The threat was unmistakable. As Marcus left Montgomery's chambers, he noticed Sophia watching from down the hall, guilt flashing across her face before she quickly turned away. The betrayal stung, but it also confirmed his suspicions he had stumbled onto something significant enough to warrant immediate intervention. That evening, as Marcus left the court building, he noticed an unmarked black sedan idling across the street. The vehicle pulled into traffic behind him, maintaining a consistent distance all the way to the bus stop. When Marcus boarded his bus, the sedan remained parked, the driver watching until the bus turned the corner. The surveillance continued. Over the next few days, the same vehicle appeared outside his school and his grandmother's workplace. When Marcus mentioned it to Washington, she immediately assigned a private investigator to document the intimidation and trace the vehicle's registration. "It's registered to a private security firm frequently contracted by the Metropolitan Police Department," the investigator reported back, "usually for surveillance of suspected drug operations or gang activity." "They're using police resources to intimidate a 14-year-old, Washington said, outrage evident in her voice. "This goes beyond Caldwell now. They're worried about what you know." The intimidation escalated when Eliza began receiving strange calls at work, silent when she answered, but coming frequently enough to unnerve her colleagues. The hospital's security office traced one call to a phone registered to the police department's administrative office, though the department denied any knowledge when Washington inquired. At school, Marcus faced a different kind of pressure. Principal Hernandez called him into her office to discuss his situation. "The superintendent has expressed concerns about disruption to the educational environment," she explained, uncomfortable but clearly following directions. "There's been discussion about whether an alternative educational arrangement might be more appropriate until your legal matters are resolved." "You're talking about expelling me," Marcus translated, the unfairness hitting him like a physical blow. "Not expelling," Hernandez clarified quickly, "but perhaps a temporary remote learning program. The district is concerned about media presence, protests, and the effect on other students." Marcus recognized the strategy: isolate him, reduce his visibility, diminish his credibility. The systematic effort to silence him was expanding beyond harassment to actively dismantling his life piece by piece. The most direct confrontation came unexpectedly at the Supreme Court itself. As Marcus exited the building after finishing research for Justice Richardson, Commissioner Harrison was waiting on the steps. The tall, imposing figure cut an authoritative presence in his dress uniform, stars gleaming on his collar. "Marcus, "Johnson," Harrison called, his voice carrying across the plaza. "A moment of your time." Wary but seeing no way to avoid the encounter with numerous witnesses present, Marcus approached. Harrison guided him to a quieter area near the massive columns, maintaining a pleasant expression for any onlookers. "You've caused quite a stir, young man," Harrison said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Officer Caldwell's 20-year career destroyed, department morale damaged, public trust undermined, all from one unfortunate misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Marcus replied evenly. "It was assault caught on video with multiple witnesses." Harrison sighed as though dealing with a stubborn child. "The world isn't as simple as you think, Marcus. Sometimes the pursuit of what you perceive as justice can have unintended consequences for everyone involved." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Harrison continued, his voice lowered. "I understand you've been looking into matters beyond your incident. Court records, connections, old cases. That's dangerous territory for a boy with such a promising future." Before Marcus could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Commissioner Harrison," Justice Richardson called, descending the steps toward them. "What a surprise to find you here." Harrison straightened, his demeanor shifting instantly to professional respect. "Justice Richardson, just having a friendly conversation with your intern." "Indeed," Richardson replied coolly. "Marcus, I believe we have that research matter to discuss." "Commissioner, always a pleasure." As she guided Marcus back into the building, her hand firm on his shoulder, Marcus realized how perfectly timed her intervention had been. Through the massive doors he glanced back to see Harrison watching them, his expression calculating and cold. "He knows about the Montgomery connection," Marcus whispered once they were inside. "I suspected as much," Richardson replied. "Marcus, you've stumbled into something deeper and more dangerous than a single incident of police misconduct. The connections between Montgomery, Harrison, and others represent a power structure that protects itself at all costs." "What should I do?" Marcus asked, the magnitude of his situation becoming increasingly clear. Justice Richardson's expression was grave. "Be very careful. Document everything. Trust very few people. And remember that sometimes justice takes longer paths than we might wish." What neither of them realized was how deeply the corruption extended, or how determined certain powerful figures were to ensure Marcus Johnson's voice would be silenced before he could expose the truth. The civil lawsuit against Officer Caldwell and the Metropolitan Police Department proceeded despite numerous procedural delays and motions to dismiss. Each legal obstacle was overcome by Washington's determined team, but the process drained both time and emotional resources. For Marcus, each deposition and hearing meant reliving the humiliation and fear of that day on the sidewalk. 6 weeks after filing the lawsuit, the personal costs of Marcus's stand for justice began to mount in ways he hadn't anticipated. His grandmother Eliza, always his strongest supporter, collapsed while working her shift at Georgetown University Hospital. The diagnosis was stress-induced cardiac arrhythmia, not immediately life-threatening, but requiring hospitalization and presenting a warning sign her doctors couldn't ignore. Marcus sat beside her hospital bed, watching the steady rhythm of her heart monitor, guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders. "This is because of me," he whispered, holding her weathered hand. "Because of all the stress from my case." Eliza squeezed his fingers weakly. "This is because I'm 67 with high blood pressure, baby. Don't you dare take that on yourself." But Marcus couldn't shake the conviction that his pursuit of justice was endangering the person he loved most. The threatening calls to her workplace, the vandalism at their apartment, the constant media attention all had taken a toll on Eliza's health. The doctor had been clear that stress reduction was essential to her recovery. At school, Marcus found himself increasingly isolated. Friends who had initially supported him began keeping their distance, their parents concerned about association with someone in such a controversial spotlight. David Chen, once his closest friend and lab partner, apologetically explained his situation during lunch. "My dad says I can't hang out outside of school anymore," David said, staring at his tray. "He says it's not that he doesn't support you, but he's up for partner at his law firm and can't risk any controversy." Even teachers began treating him differently. Some were overly accommodating, offering extensions he hadn't requested, while others became strangely formal, as though worried any interaction might be misconstrued. The comfortable academic environment that had been his refuge had transformed into yet another space where he felt marked by his experience. Marcus had been selected months earlier to represent Jefferson Middle School at the prestigious national Young Scientists competition. His research project on algorithmic bias in facial recognition software had been praised by the selection committee as extraordinary work, especially from an 8th grade student. 2 weeks after Eliza's hospitalization, Principal Hernandez regretfully informed him that the selection had been rescinded. The competition committee expressed concerns about potential disruptions and media attention, she explained, unable to meet his eyes. They've selected David Chen as an alternate representative. The systematic dismantling of opportunities continued when Washington discovered that evidence in their lawsuit had been compromised. Witness statements had been misplaced by court clerks. Bodycam footage from Officer Peters, Caldwell's partner, was declared corrupted and unrecoverable. The crucial enhanced audio from the bystander video was challenged on technical grounds, with police experts claiming it had been improperly manipulated. They're erasing evidence piece by piece, Washington explained during a strategy session in her office, creating just enough doubt to give friendly judges reason to limit what the jury can see. Justice Richardson faced her own consequences for supporting Marcus. An anonymous complaint triggered an ethics investigation into her mentorship of Marcus, suggesting she had shown improper bias in a matter likely to come before the court. While the investigation would ultimately clear her, the process was designed to be lengthy and embarrassing, with leaks to the press at strategic moments. Alone in his bedroom at night, Marcus found himself questioning whether the fight was worth the cost. His grandmother's health, his education, Justice Richardson's reputation, all were being damaged because he had refused to accept a settlement and sign an NDA. The temptation to end the struggle grew stronger as the weeks passed and the opposition's tactics became more aggressive. The final blow came when Marcus received an email from the Shepherd Foundation, which had awarded him the prestigious scholarship that would fund his high school education at Washington Academy, one of the top preparatory schools in the nation. The carefully worded message expressed concerns about recent events and, regretfully, informed him that his scholarship had been placed under review. The foundation's major donors included several corporations with ties to Justice Montgomery's family enterprises. Without the scholarship, Marcus's educational path faced a significant detour. Washington Academy had been a crucial step toward his goal of an Ivy League education and eventually law school. The public high school in his neighborhood was overcrowded and underfunded, with fewer than 30% of graduates continuing to four-year colleges. When Marcus showed the email to his grandmother, still recovering at home under doctors' orders to avoid stress, she tried to comfort him. "There are other scholarships, other schools," she assured him. "Your brilliance will shine wherever you go." But Marcus understood what was happening with painful clarity. This wasn't just about Officer Caldwell anymore. Powerful interests were systematically closing doors, limiting his options, isolating him from support, and demonstrating the consequences of challenging the established order. They were making an example of him, showing what happened to those who refused to accept injustice quietly. That night, alone in his room with the scholarship email still open on his computer screen, Marcus hit rock bottom. The weight of fighting not just Caldwell, but an entire system designed to protect itself had become crushing. His dream of changing the system from within seemed naive now that he understood the system's power to destroy those who challenged it. For the first time since his parents' death, Marcus cried himself to sleep, unsure whether he had the strength to continue the fight or the courage to surrender. Do you think Marcus should accept defeat to protect his family and future, or continue fighting a system that's determined to silence him? Comment number 1 if you believe justice is worth any personal cost, or number 2 if you think Marcus needs to prioritize his and his grandmother's well-being over the legal battle. Like this video if you've ever felt powerless against a corrupt system, and subscribe to see the unexpected ally who will soon emerge to change everything. How much should anyone sacrifice in pursuit of justice? And is the system too powerful to ever change from within? The fluorescent lights of Georgetown University Hospital cast harsh shadows across Eliza Johnson's face as Marcus sat beside her bed during visiting hours. Though doctors had cleared her to return home tomorrow, the frailty in her once sturdy frame disturbed Marcus deeply. She had been his rock since his parents' death, and seeing her vulnerability shook him to his core. "I've been thinking about dropping the lawsuit," Marcus confessed, staring at their intertwined hands. "It's not worth what it's doing to you." "To us?" Eliza's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Marcus Johnson, you look at me now." Her voice held the firm tone that had guided him through childhood tantrums and teenage doubts alike. "Did I ever tell you about your great-grandfather?" "William?" Marcus shook his head, uncertain where this was leading. "William Johnson registered voters in Mississippi in 1964, had his house firebombed, lost his job, got beaten so badly he walked with a limp until the day he died." Her eyes held a fierce intensity. "But he never stopped. And because he didn't stop, your grandfather could vote without fear, and your father could become a lawyer, and you can aspire to be a justice." She squeezed his hand again. "Our family doesn't surrender to injustice, Marcus. Not ever. No matter the cost." The conviction in her voice rekindled something in Marcus, a sense of purpose beyond his personal suffering, a connection to a legacy of resistance that stretched back generations. He left the hospital with renewed determination, though still unsure how to counter the coordinated efforts against him. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at their apartment. Professor James Wilson, his father's former law school mentor and family friend, stood at their door holding a casserole dish and a determined expression. "Eliza called me," Wilson explained, setting down the food. "Said you might need someone. In your corner right now." At 65, Professor Wilson had taught constitutional law for over 30 years and had been instrumental in several landmark civil rights cases as a young attorney. More importantly, he had remained close to the Johnson family after Marcus's father died, stepping in as an occasional father figure for the boy who shared his passion for law. Over dinner, Wilson listened as Marcus detailed everything that had happened since the incident, the evidence tampering, the intimidation tactics, the scholarship withdrawal, and Justice Montgomery's connection to Commissioner Harrison. "They're using every lever of power to silence you," Wilson observed, his academic detachment giving way to outrage. "But they've overplayed their hand. The more resources they dedicate to crushing one 14-year-old boy, the more obvious their corruption becomes." Wilson offered his guest house as a safe place for Marcus and Eliza once she was discharged from the hospital. The property in Fay, a quiet suburb, had security features from Wilson's days handling controversial cases, including surveillance cameras and a secure perimeter. "It would give you both some peace while you regroup," Wilson suggested. "And I might be able to help with your educational situation as well." True to his word, within days of their relocation, Wilson had connected Marcus with the Community Justice Scholarship Fund, a grassroots organization dedicated to supporting students affected by racial injustice. The fund's director, a former civil rights attorney named Maya Patel, immediately recognized Marcus's potential. "We would be honored to sponsor your education at Washington Academy," Patel told him during their meeting. "Our donors specifically want to support students who've shown courage in the face of systemic injustice." With secure housing and his educational future temporarily stabilized, Marcus could refocus on his case. He began systematically researching other incidents involving Officer Caldwell, using public records requests and online databases. The pattern became increasingly clear. Caldwell's misconduct disproportionately targeted minorities, particularly young black men, and departmental responses consistently protected him from consequences. More disturbing was Marcus's discovery that Caldwell wasn't an aberration, but representative of a pattern throughout the department. Analyzing complaint data revealed clusters of officers with multiple allegations working under specific commanders, who had risen through the ranks alongside Commissioner Harrison. Marcus compiled his findings into a detailed report, which Washington incorporated into their legal strategy. This transforms our case from an isolated incident to evidence of a pattern and practice of discrimination, she explained. It substantially strengthens our position. Meanwhile, Justice Richardson continued, providing guidance behind the scenes, careful to maintain appropriate boundaries given her position. Focus on the systemic aspects, she advised during a carefully arranged meeting at Professor Wilson's home. Individual officers are replaceable. The structures that protect them are the real target. The tide began to turn when Marcus connected with 3 other young men who had filed complaints against Officer Caldwell in previous years. All described similar experiences: unwarranted aggression, racial slurs, excessive force, and all had seen their complaints dismissed or buried. Washington added them as supporting witnesses in the civil case, establishing a pattern of behavior that became increasingly difficult for the department to dismiss. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Officer Thomas Peters, Caldwell's partner during the incident with Marcus, contacted Washington through an intermediary. Troubled by the department's handling of the case and facing his own crisis of conscience, Peters agreed to testify about what he had witnessed, not just during Marcus's incident, but numerous other occasions where Caldwell had targeted minorities without justification. "I can't keep quiet anymore," Peters told Washington during their confidential meeting. "This isn't what I signed up for when I became a police officer." Peters revealed that Caldwell had indeed used a racial slur before approaching Marcus, that the department had edited the official incident report to remove damaging details, and that senior officers had pressured Peters to align his statement with Caldwell's version of events. His testimony would be devastating to the department's defense, providing insider confirmation of both the incident and the subsequent cover-up attempt. Washington moved quickly to secure a formal deposition before the department could pressure Peters into silence. The most dramatic development came when an anonymous whistleblower, identified only as Officer Truth, leaked internal police communications to the Washington Post. The emails and text messages showed a coordinated effort by department leadership to discredit Marcus, intimidate witnesses, and pressure the district attorney to decline prosecution. Most damning were messages from Commissioner Harrison directing subordinates to find whatever dirt exists on the Johnson kid and make this go away by any means necessary. The leaked communications made front-page news, shifting public opinion decisively in Marcus's favor. Civil rights organizations renewed calls for Harrison's resignation. The mayor, sensing political winds changing, announced the formation of an independent commission to investigate departmental practices. Officer Caldwell's partner, Peters, became increasingly central to the case as he agreed to provide more detailed testimony. The day before his scheduled deposition, however, Peters was found unconscious in the parking garage of his apartment building, having suffered a severe beating. Though he survived, the message was clear: those who broke ranks faced violent consequences. Rather than silencing Peters, the attack strengthened his resolve. From his hospital bed, he gave a recorded statement to Washington, providing even more detailed accounts of departmental corruption. The attack against Peters crossed a line that even department defenders found difficult to justify, creating further fractures in the once solid blue wall of silence. For Marcus, each development brought mixed emotions: vindication coupled with growing concern for the safety of those who supported him. The systematic effort to silence him had expanded to threaten anyone who aligned with his cause. The stakes had grown far beyond his individual case, to encompass a fundamental challenge to institutional power. When Marcus received a death threat containing details about his daily schedule that only someone with access to police surveillance would know, the FBI finally became involved, opening an investigation into potential civil rights violations and witness intimidation. The federal involvement added another layer of protection and legitimacy to Marcus's case, signaling that local authorities could no longer contain the controversy. The emergence of multiple officers willing to speak about the department's culture of discrimination and retaliation transformed the narrative. Marcus was no longer an isolated teenager making claims against a respected officer. He had become the catalyst for a broader reckoning within a department long plagued by systemic issues. As public support shifted and legal momentum built, Marcus began to see a path forward. The system that had seemed impenetrably aligned against him now showed cracks and vulnerabilities. Justice, while neither swift nor guaranteed, appeared possible for the first time since the strike that had altered his life's trajectory. "We're at a turning point," Washington told him during a strategy session. "They're still powerful, still dangerous, but they're now playing defense, and that changes everything." The shift in momentum triggered a desperate and dangerous counterattack from those with the most to lose. 2 days after Officer Peters gave his recorded testimony from his hospital bed, the firestorm began. Police Union President Victor Mercer held a press conference denouncing Peters as a disgruntled officer with performance issues, whose testimony was unreliable and motivated by personal grievances. Department records mysteriously leaked to friendly media outlets showing Peters had been passed over for promotion twice, framing his testimony as retaliation rather than conscience. His personnel file, altered to include fabricated disciplinary issues, circulated among reporters covering the case. Marcus received increasingly specific threats, including photographs of him entering Professor Wilson's home taken with a telephoto lens and a note reading "Nowhere is safe." The FBI assigned agents to investigate, but the intimidation achieved its intended effect. Marcus found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, startling at sudden noises, struggling to sleep. Washington advised against public appearances, but Marcus had committed to testifying before the city council about police practices. Despite security concerns, he refused to cancel. "If I hide now," he told his grandmother, "they win." The council chambers were packed when Marcus took his seat at the witness table. Security was tight, with FBI agents supplementing regular officers. Councilwoman Diane Jordan, chair of the Public Safety Committee, thanked Marcus for his courage in appearing despite the threats. "I'm here because what happened to me happens to people who look like me every day," Marcus began, his voice steady, despite his nerves. "The difference is that most don't have video evidence, Supreme Court mentors, or national attention to protect them." For the next 30 minutes, Marcus detailed not just his personal experience, but the systematic efforts to silence him afterward. The council members listened intently as he described the evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and the attack on Officer Peters. When asked what changes he would recommend, Marcus presented a thoughtful list of reforms, including independent oversight, body camera requirements, and anti-bias training. Police Commissioner Harrison sat stone-faced in the front row, flanked by department attorneys. Halfway through Marcus's testimony, he received a text message that prompted a barely concealed smile before he quietly exited the chamber. Hours later, Marcus learned the reason for Harrison's expression. The commissioner had called an emergency press conference to announce the department had uncovered disturbing new evidence regarding Marcus Johnson. With cameras rolling, Harrison revealed allegations that Marcus had been involved in a shoplifting incident at Pearson's convenience store the day of his encounter with Officer Caldwell. "Store security footage shows Mr. Johnson placing items in his pocket," Harrison claimed, displaying a grainy image that showed someone roughly Marcus's height and build near a store shelf. This directly contradicts his claim that he was innocently checking text messages when approached by officers responding to a reported theft. The accusation was broadcast across all major networks, with conservative outlets particularly eager to promote this vindication of Officer Caldwell. The alleged security footage, however, was not released in full, with the department citing an ongoing investigation. Washington immediately filed for a court order demanding the complete unedited footage. "This is a transparent attempt to smear Marcus after his compelling counsel testimony," she told reporters. "If this footage actually exists in complete form, it will exonerate him, not incriminate him." Mr. Pearson, the store owner who had known Marcus for years, publicly refuted the accusation. "Marcus Johnson has never stolen from my store. He's a respectful young man who I've watched grow up. No theft was reported that day because no theft occurred." Within hours, Pearson received a visit from health inspectors who suddenly found multiple violations that threatened to shut down his business. The message was clear. Those who supported Marcus would face consequences. The false shoplifting allegation, while ultimately unsustainable, achieved its primary purpose of creating a new narrative for those predisposed to doubt Marcus. Social media filled with comments questioning his character and suggesting the entire case had been misrepresented. The department had successfully muddied the waters just as public opinion had begun to solidify against them. More alarming developments followed when Marcus received a death threat specifying details that only someone with access to official surveillance would know. "We know you're staying at Professor Wilson's guest house on Maple Street," the anonymous message read. "We know you leave for school at 7:15 a.m. We know Grandma Eliza takes her heart medication at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to shut up." The FBI increased security around the Wilson property, but the psychological damage was done. Marcus and Eliza were now painfully aware of how closely they were being watched and how far their opponents would go to silence them. The situation escalated further when FBI agents monitoring police radio frequencies intercepted coded messages suggesting a planned operation near Wilson's address. Agents rushed to relocate Marcus and Eliza to a safe house, but before they could complete the evacuation, the threat materialized in frightening form. At 2:17 a.m., a Molotov cocktail crashed through the guest house window, igniting the living room in flames. Marcus, awakened by the sound of breaking glass, managed to get his grandmother safely out the back door before the fire spread. Professor Wilson, rushing from the main house to help, suffered second-degree burns to his arm and smoke inhalation that required hospitalization. The FBI classified the attack as attempted murder and a hate crime, taking over primary jurisdiction from local authorities. The Bureau's involvement further elevated the case's profile, with the Attorney General making a public statement condemning the horrific attack on a child witness and his family. The firebombing created a wave of public outrage that overwhelmed attempts to discredit Marcus. Images of the burned-out guest house, juxtaposed with Marcus's school photo, appeared on front pages nationwide. Even media outlets previously sympathetic to the police department struggled to justify or explain away such a violent attack on a 14-year-old boy and his elderly grandmother. Marcus refused the FBI's offer of witness protection, unwilling to disappear when justice seemed finally within reach. "I can't hide," he told Washington during an emergency meeting at her office. "That's what they want for me to vanish, to give up, to become another silenced victim." Instead, Marcus made a bold decision that Washington initially opposed but eventually supported. He would continue pursuing the case while refusing police protection, not trusting any officers connected to the department under investigation. Private security would be arranged through Washington's firm, supplemented by community volunteers, organized by Pastor Washington and other local leaders. "The people will protect one of their own," Pastor Washington declared during a community meeting at First Baptist Church. "When the system fails, the community steps up." Hundreds volunteered for a round-the-clock community watch program, ensuring Marcus and Eliza were never unprotected. The grassroots security operation became its own powerful statement about community solidarity in the face of institutional failure. National civil rights organizations provided funding and training for the volunteers, transforming a desperate measure into an organized movement. As the trial date for the civil case approached, Commissioner Harrison made one final attempt to contain the situation. Through intermediaries, he offered a substantially increased settlement: $2 million, policy reforms, Officer Caldwell's termination, and a public apology, but still with a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent Marcus from discussing the case or the department's subsequent actions. "It's a genuine offer," Washington acknowledged during their discussion. "More than we might get even with a favorable jury verdict, and it removes the uncertainty of trial." Marcus considered the offer seriously, consulting with his grandmother, Professor Wilson and Justice Richardson. The money would secure his future education and Eliza's retirement. The policy reforms, if implemented, could prevent similar incidents. Officer Caldwell's career would end, but the non-disclosure requirement would silence him about the intimidation campaign, the evidence tampering, the attack on Officer Peters, and the firebombing all the systemic corruption that extended far beyond one officer's misconduct. It would protect Harrison, Montgomery, and the entire power structure that had nearly destroyed his life to maintain its authority. After 3 days of deliberation, Marcus declined the offer. "This stopped being just about me a long time ago," he explained to Washington. "I can't accept silence as part of justice." With settlement rejected, both sides prepared for what promised to be the most closely watched civil rights trial in recent memory. As Marcus reviewed his testimony with Washington one final time, he felt a strange combination of dread and determination. The system had revealed its true nature, both its awesome power to protect itself and its vulnerability to persistent challenge. Whatever the outcome, Marcus Johnson had already accomplished something remarkable. A 14-year-old boy had forced a reckoning that decades of complaints, reports, and commissions had failed to achieve. The trial would determine the legal verdict, but in many ways the moral verdict had already been rendered. The first day of trial dawned with media encampments surrounding the federal courthouse. Satellite trucks lined Constitution Avenue as reporters from around the world covered what had become emblematic of America's ongoing struggle with race, policing, and accountability. Marcus arrived flanked by Washington's legal team and community volunteers who had formed a protective human chain against potential threats. Inside the imposing courtroom, Marcus felt a strange calm descend as he took his seat at the plaintiff's table. For months others had spoken about him, for him and against him. Now finally, he would speak for himself, under oath, with the full power of legal proceedings behind him. Judge Evelyn Carter, a 30-year veteran of the federal bench, known for her strict courtroom management and impeccable fairness, surveyed the packed gallery with a stern expression. "This courtroom is not a theater," she announced. "It is a place of law. I expect decorum from all parties and spectators, regardless of the high-profile nature of these proceedings." Washington's opening statement was masterfully restrained, focusing on the facts established by video evidence, while hinting at the broader pattern of misconduct. "For this case began with a slap," she told the jury, "but it reveals a systemic failure that goes far beyond a single moment of violence." The defense team, led by veteran police attorney Richard Daniels, framed the case as an unfortunate misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by political forces. Officer Caldwell made a split-second decision in what he perceived as a potentially threatening situation, Daniels argued. With the benefit of hindsight and edited video, that decision has been mischaracterized and exploited by those with political agendas. As evidence presentation began, Washington methodically established the timeline of events through witness testimony and video evidence. The enhanced audio capturing Caldwell's racial slur played for the jury, their expressions noticeably hardening. As the officer's contemptuous tone filled the courtroom, bystander witnesses recounted what they had seen, each testimony reinforcing the others. Mr. Pearson testified about Marcus's regular visits to his store and explicitly denied any theft had occurred, directly contradicting Commissioner Harrison's public claims. When presented with the allegedly incriminating security footage Harrison had displayed, Pearson identified it as coming from a different day entirely. Character witnesses from the Supreme Court spoke to Marcus's exceptional qualities. Justice Richardson's former clerk described him as the most impressive young person I've ever encountered. Marcus's teachers detailed his academic excellence and leadership. Each testimony built a portrait in direct contradiction to the department's attempts to paint him as a troublemaker. When Officer Peters was wheeled into court, still recovering from his beating, a hush fell over the room. Despite visible discomfort, his testimony was devastating. He described Caldwell's history of targeting young black males, the department's systematic altering of reports, and direct instructions from superiors to support the official narrative, regardless of facts. Most damaging was Peters' account of a meeting where Commissioner Harrison had explicitly directed officers to find or create evidence discrediting Marcus. He said, and I quote, "I don't care what you have to do, make this Johnson problem disappear," and then looked directly at Internal Affairs Captain Reeves and said, "I'm sure there's something in his past we can use." During cross-examination, the defense team attempted to portray Peters as a disgruntled employee with performance issues who had turned against his colleagues for personal gain. Peters remained unshaken, calmly acknowledging his own complicity in the system before his conscience forced him to speak out. "Yes, I was part of the problem," he admitted. "I stood by while Caldwell assaulted Marcus. I stayed silent through years of similar incidents. I'm not testifying for personal gain or immunity. I'm here because I can't live with myself if I don't tell the truth now." The department's case began to unravel further when electronic forensics experts testified about the doctored evidence. The allegedly incriminating security footage had been edited, timestamps altered, and reports backdated. Each revelation pushed the case beyond individual misconduct toward conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Washington methodically connected the dots between Officer Caldwell's history of complaints, Commissioner Harrison's interference, and Justice Montgomery's influence. Without directly accusing Montgomery of corruption, the testimony established clear links between his office and Harrison around the time of the covered-up incident involving Montgomery's son. When Officer Caldwell finally took the stand, his testimony contrasted sharply with the confident figure who had assaulted Marcus months earlier. Defensive and frequently contradictory, he struggled to explain his actions in the face of video evidence. His claim of feeling threatened by a 14-year-old honor student drew visible skepticism from jury members. On the trial's fourth day, Marcus Johnson took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as he walked forward, looking somehow both younger and older than his 14 years in his carefully pressed suit. After being sworn in, he sat with perfect posture, hands folded, ready to face whatever questions came. Washington guided him gently through his account of the incident, allowing him to explain in his own words what had happened and how it had affected him. Marcus spoke clearly and directly, without embellishment or exaggeration. The simple truth of his experience needed no dramatic flourishes. "I was checking a text message about a math test," he explained. "Then suddenly there were officers demanding ID, calling me suspicious, not giving me time to explain. When Officer Caldwell slapped me, I felt less than human. Like my existence in that space was a crime itself." Marcus detailed the aftermath, the threats, the scholarship withdrawal, his grandmother's health crisis, Professor Wilson's injury, all with the same measured clarity. When asked why he had rejected settlement offers that would have secured his future, his answer resonated throughout the courtroom. "I couldn't accept money for my silence," he said. "Not when the same system that failed me is failing others every day. Not when Officer Peters nearly died for telling the truth. Not when Professor Wilson's home was firebombed for sheltering us. This case stopped being just about me a long time ago." Defense attorney Daniels approached for cross-examination with calculated aggression, hoping to provoke an emotional response that might undermine Marcus's credibility. "Mr. Johnson, you've become quite the celebrity from this incident, haven't you? Appearing on national news, speaking at rallies, becoming a household name." "I never wanted attention," Marcus replied calmly. "I wanted justice." Daniels shifted tactics, implying that Marcus had deliberately provoked Caldwell by reaching for his pocket against instructions. "Isn't it true that when Officer Caldwell instructed you not to reach for anything, you immediately did exactly that?" "I reached slowly for my ID after explaining I was going to do so," Marcus corrected. The video shows this clearly. Frustrated by Marcus's composure, Daniels made a critical error, asking dismissively, "Come on, Mr. Johnson, you're a smart kid from a tough neighborhood. You know how these things work. Wouldn't you agree that a certain amount of police assertiveness is necessary when dealing with suspicious individuals in high-security areas?" The implication hung in the air. Washington half rose to object, but Marcus responded before she could speak. "Sir, I was a 14-year-old honor student picking up heart medication for my grandmother. The only thing suspicious about me was the color of my skin. If you're suggesting I somehow deserve to be assaulted because of how I look or where I'm from, then you're confirming exactly why this lawsuit is necessary." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several jurors nodded unconsciously. Judge Carter called for order, but the damage to the defense was done. Daniels had inadvertently reinforced the central issue of racial bias. As the trial progressed, Evidence of departmental conspiracy mounted. Financial records revealed payments from a police foundation controlled by Harrison to a security firm owned by Justice Montgomery's brother-in-law, the same firm that had conducted surveillance on Marcus. Email communications showed coordination between Montgomery's office and the police department regarding Marcus's case. In closing arguments, Washington stood before the jury without notes, speaking from the heart. This case began with a slap of physical expression of contempt and dismissal, but it revealed something much deeper, a system that reflexively protects itself at all costs, that views accountability as a threat, that values power over justice. She gestured toward Marcus. A 14-year-old boy stood up and said, "This is wrong." For that simple act of courage, he faced character assassination, intimidation, and violence. If we as a society cannot protect a child who speaks truth, what hope do we have for justice for anyone? The defense's closing focused on procedural issues and attempted to isolate Caldwell's actions from the broader department, characterizing subsequent events as unfortunate misunderstandings rather than coordinated retaliation. Their argument seemed hollow after weeks of damning testimony. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. As the forewoman stood to deliver the verdict, Marcus gripped his grandmother's hand. Whatever happened next, he had done everything possible to hold the system accountable. In the matter of Johnson versus Caldwell and the Metropolitan Police Department, the forewoman announced, "We find for the plaintiff on all counts." The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos as Judge Carter called for order. The jury had awarded Marcus $5 million in damages, the largest settlement in the city's history for a police misconduct case. More importantly, they found evidence of departmental negligence and pattern of discrimination, opening the door for broader reforms. As Marcus and his legal team exited the courthouse, supporters cheered from behind barricades. Justice, delayed and imperfect, had finally arrived, but as Washington reminded him quietly amid the celebration, this is just the beginning of change, not the end. 1 year after the verdict, Marcus Johnson stood in the East Room of the White House, watching as the president signed the Comprehensive Police Accountability Act. At 15, he had been invited as an honored guest, recognized as the catalyst, whose case had sparked a national reckoning on policing and racial justice. The journey from courthouse victory to systemic change had been neither simple nor straight. The jury's historic verdict against Officer Caldwell in the Metropolitan Police Department had immediately faced appeals and legal challenges. However, the public spotlight and overwhelming evidence had made it impossible to overturn. Marcus had made a decision that surprised many, but aligned perfectly with his character and values. Rather than using the settlement money for personal benefit, he established the Johnson Justice Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and advocating for reform. The foundation provided legal assistance, counseling services, and educational opportunities for affected families. "My grandmother taught me that privilege comes with responsibility," Marcus explained during the foundation's launch. "I was fortunate enough to have Justice Richardson's support and national attention. Most victims have neither. This foundation exists to change that reality." The ripple effects from the case continued to transform institutions. The Department of Justice launched a comprehensive investigation into the Metropolitan Police Department, uncovering patterns of discrimination, evidence tampering, and retaliatory practices that extended far beyond Marcus's experience. Commissioner Harrison resigned under pressure as evidence of his direct involvement in the cover-up became impossible to deny. Federal prosecutors brought charges against him for witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. Several senior officers who had participated in the conspiracy also faced criminal charges, including those responsible for the attack on Officer Peters and the firebombing of Professor Wilson's home. Officer Caldwell was terminated and criminally charged, not only for assaulting Marcus, but for similar incidents uncovered during the investigation. His trial was scheduled for the coming month, with Peters as a key witness. The blue wall of silence that had protected officers like Caldwell for decades showed significant cracks as more officers came forward with accounts of misconduct they had witnessed or been pressured to ignore. Perhaps most surprisingly, Justice William Montgomery announced his early retirement from the Supreme Court amid an ethics investigation into his connections with Commissioner Harrison and interference in cases involving his son. The investigation raised serious questions about judicial independence and the informal power networks that operated behind official institutions. For Justice Eleanor Richardson, the resolution brought both vindication and new responsibility. Following Montgomery's retirement, she was nominated as the first black female Chief Justice, a historic appointment that recognized her unwavering commitment to constitutional principles even under intense pressure. "Justice is not an abstraction or a distant ideal," she said during her confirmation hearing. As Marcus Johnson reminded us all, justice requires courage and personal sacrifice. It demands that we look squarely at our institution's failures without losing faith in their potential. Marcus returned to his Supreme Court internship with a hero's welcome from staff who had watched his ordeal from a distance, many silently supporting him while fearing professional consequences. The same halls that had once felt threatening during the height of the conspiracy now represented possibility, again the potential for institutions to evolve through accountability. The city implemented a comprehensive police reform program directly influenced by Marcus's experience. New training protocols addressed implicit bias and excessive force. An independent oversight board, with genuine investigative authority, replaced the ineffective internal affairs process. Body cameras became mandatory, with footage automatically archived beyond departmental control. Most significantly, a civilian review process was established for all use of force incidents involving minors. 1 year to the day after Officer Caldwell had slapped Marcus on that Washington sidewalk, Marcus received an invitation that represented the ultimate validation of his struggle. The House Judiciary Committee requested his testimony regarding the proposed Marcus Johnson Justice in Policing Act, federal legislation that would establish national standards for police conduct and accountability. Standing before Congress at 15 years old, Marcus spoke with the same composed clarity that had characterized his courtroom testimony. Representatives from both parties listened attentively as he recounted not just his personal experience, but the systemic failures it had revealed. "What happened to me was not exceptional," he testified. "What was exceptional was that I had resources, support and visibility that most victims lack. This legislation must protect everyone, not just those fortunate enough to have a Supreme Court justice as a mentor." As the hearing concluded, the committee chairwoman asked a question that captured the significance of Marcus's journey. "After everything you've experienced, Mr. Johnson, do you still aspire to a career in law? Do you still believe in our system, despite witnessing its failures firsthand?" Marcus paused, considering his answer carefully. "I believe in what our system can be, even when it falls short of its promise. My experience showed me both the worst and the best of American justice, its capacity for self-protection, and its potential for self-correction." He gestured toward Justice Richardson seated in the gallery. "My mentor often reminds me that justice isn't a destination, but a constant struggle. So yes, I still plan to become an attorney, and perhaps someday a justice. Not despite what I experienced, but because of it." The legislation passed with bipartisan support, transformed by Marcus's testimony from an abstract policy debate into a moral imperative. When the president signed it into law, he handed the ceremonial pen to Marcus, saying, "Your courage made this possible." As Marcus descended the White House steps after the signing ceremony, he paused to take in the moment. His grandmother Eliza waited below, healthier now and beaming with pride. Professor Wilson stood beside her, his injured arm healed but still bearing scars from the firebombing, physical reminders of the cost of standing for justice. Washington had once told him that systems resist change until resistance becomes more costly than adaptation. Through his refusal to be silenced, Marcus had shifted that equation, making accountability less costly than continued corruption. One case, one voice, had created fractures through which transformation became possible. Marcus Johnson, now 15, walked down those historic steps, not as a victim but as an agent of change. his future stretching before him with renewed purpose. The same determination that had sustained him through months of intimidation and retaliation now fueled his vision for continued reform. The journey that began with a slap on a Washington sidewalk had transformed not just his life, but the system itself. Justice, imperfect and ongoing, had prevailed not through abstract principles, but through the courage of individuals willing to stand against powerful institutions. The revolution of justice continued, with each step forward making the next one possible. As Marcus joined his grandmother and Professor Wilson, a group of young black teenagers recognized him, approaching nervously for a photo. "You showed us. We can fight back and win," one said quietly. "You changed what we believe is possible." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of that statement. Changing what people believe is possible, perhaps that was the most profound revolution of all. Marcus Johnson's journey teaches us that true justice requires both courage and perseverance in the face of systemic opposition. His story demonstrates how power structures protect themselves at all costs, and meaningful change demands unwavering determination despite intimidation and retaliation. The case reveals how institutional racism operates not just through individual actions, but through coordinated efforts to silence those who challenge the status quo. Yet it also shows that no system is impenetrable when truth is pursued with conviction. Marcus proved that a single voice, backed by evidence and moral clarity, can create fractures through which transformation becomes possible. His greatest legacy wasn't just holding one officer accountable, but exposing the machinery that enables injustice and inspiring a new generation to believe in their power to effect change. Has Marcus's story changed your perspective on how justice really works in America? Comment below with your thoughts on whether a single individual can truly make a difference against powerful institutions. If you believe in standing up for what's right regardless of the personal cost, hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and resilience in the face of injustice. And share this video with someone who needs to understand the real challenges facing those who seek accountability in our system. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey through Beyond the Shadow of Justice. Remember, in the words of Justice Richardson, justice isn't a destination, but a constant struggle, one that requires each of us to play our part.